Very much. I think this is, in a sense, all of the panels are touching on this issue. There's a dramatic change, about 3 months old, in the transatlantic relationship. A lot of what we heard from the ministers who were speaking earlier are dealing with, and from President Kwaśniewski, with the very long-term challenge to Europe and to the world posed by Russia. I think what hopefully this panel will address is the much more recent and also potentially overwhelmingly large challenge posed by the changes that are happening in the United States. I had an experience with this myself. A few months ago, about 2 months ago, when the Americans completely unexpectedly first stopped aid shipments to Ukraine and then stopped intelligence sharing. I was in Brussels, where I'm the defense editor at Politico, and I called a contact of mine here in Poland, a senior Polish official, and he immediately started to lecture me. He was like, "You guys, fake news again. This is absolutely impossible. There is no way that the Americans would do something like this. You've got to get better sourcing." So I hopped on our page and sent him the WhatsApp, the whole Politico story, you should read Politico, with Pete Hegseth saying exactly that defense cooperation was ended. And a second later, I got the WhatsApp message from him, "This is something very new," as he tried to scramble and figure out where the American position had left Poland, and completely shattering his assumptions as to what the U.S. role is and what the U.S. view on security is as well. So I'd like to start maybe going from left to right across the whole panel. The big question: what is happening in Washington? Is America still a friend of the liberal order, a reliable ally, or can America simply not be trusted anymore? That it's veered off in a different direction? Go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me. And indeed, I remember I was at Munich Security Conference when sort of the news started coming in about this decision about sort of the stopping of the aid, starting of the calls between the President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And this really came as a shock, especially after Vice President J.D. Vance's speech at Munich Security Conference, directed very much at domestic audiences in the US, we believe. But I think what is particularly clear is that the liberal world order, as we know it, of post-Second World War, where the United States were the security guarantor of the safety and security of the European territorial integrity of the states that emerged after the Second World War, is over. And I think that as much as Poland considers itself one of the most pro-Atlanticist countries in the world, I believe, with actually data showing 93% of Polish people very pro-American, until quite recently. I think now a lot of the Polish audiences are simply confused as to what to think, But even though we, as Poles, would like to see a strong ally of the United States or to the European security, we cannot be naive. And I truly believe that the future of NATO at present rests on how strongly we manage to defend the values of the liberal world order, how strongly we manage to consolidate and unify as Europe, or really be marginalized and perish. And here I think Poland, enjoys a special relationship with the United States, or likes to think that we do enjoy a special relationship with Washington, D.C. And this comes from the fact that, we're stationing over 11,000 American soldiers on Polish soil. We have significant military spending, currently about 80% of our incoming military pipeline resting on the American industry, from HIMARS to Apaches to F-35s, etc. So we obviously want to see the harmonization of NATO alliance with the EU. However, we cannot be naive. And we must sort of wake up to the challenge and dramatically step up as Europe. And I believe that Poland has demonstrated with our the highest security spending amongst all NATO allies, 4.7% going to 5%, and rapid deterrence, that we take this challenge extremely seriously. Thank you.
It's interesting you mentioned the Munich Security Conference. We were there as well, and one of my Washington colleagues was sitting there as J.D. Vance began his speech, expecting that this was going to be a more or less conventional defense transatlantic oriented speech. And then when Vance started railing about the Romanian presidential election and on about European values and that sort of thing, he sort of gave up. He said, I don't know anything about any of these issues. Somebody else has to write the story, because he had completely veered off in a different direction. And I guess that sort of raises the issue, is there a set of common values between the new administration and Europe anymore? Tobias, maybe you could take the issue of is America still our ally?
Yeah, I think the important starting point is global order, the demise of global order, and there's been many comparisons, echoes of what we're living now, experiencing of 1937, of the errant nations unable to be held to account by international institutions. In those days, it was the League of Nations. You've got rearming, you've got authoritarian states starting to regroup. So there are certainly echoes. I would say it's even worse than 1937, because you've got three additional factors. One is extremism and terrorism, and the rise of the non-state actor that is also challenging the liberal order. Secondly, there's also the issue of climate change. When we see the scale of migration that's going to increase from Africa, where are they going to go? They're going to head to Europe. That's going to add challenges to governments unable to cope. And then finally is the simple speed in which technology is changing the character of conflict. So from those perspectives, the ability to maintain global order is very, very difficult indeed. And I believe Donald Trump's interpretation of this is to then say, America can't do this anymore. We can't be the leader of the West, nor can we be the global policeman successfully anymore. We're going to have a different approach. We're going to see the world somewhat chaotically. We're going to see it with some big beasts in that chaotic jungle. And those big beasts each have their fiefdoms, their territories, their tribal setups, and their influence, if you like, of their near regions. And for America, it includes Canada, it includes Panama, it includes Greenland. For Russia, it includes Ukraine. And from America's perspective, it means I'm not interested in supporting Ukraine. Indeed, my voters back in America, I just come back there, I was there 2 days ago, still see little value in supporting a place that they can't even point on a map, let alone know how to spell. And of course, that other big beast is China. And Trump's view is, I can even do deals with these people. As long as they keep their distance and allow me to continue operating, I'm going to do that. That is America first. So this traditional support for Europe, no longer there. Why should he bother defending something where, as the foreign minister of Poland said earlier, actually we have some responsibility of duty to do that ourselves. The short-sightedness of that is that, as I said in my own question, is that when America and Britain and Europe are not on the same page, then authoritarian states can start to group together. And we're seeing this with Russia and China. And that suggests the Thucydides trap, the advance of an alternative global order, China with its One Belt, One Road programs and so forth, meaning that the democracies, or the West as we know it, will start to shrink. And this is the wider existential challenge, which I don't believe the penny has dropped, certainly in the UK. When you come here, you absolutely feel it. You recognize something bigger is happening and we need to do something about it. But until we persuade the Americans, the American people, that the world is changing fast and they have a responsibility and duty, as they've done since the end of the Second World War, to repair it and to upgrade it and to defend it, then I'm afraid we're in for huge change, likely a bigger conflict, but certainly greater instability.
Yeah, your big beast analogy does not make it sound like America is in any way committed to the liberal world order or to defending Europe, or is in any way an ally of Europe anymore at all. I don't know, what's your take on that?
Well, I may sound a bit paradoxical as a French, because I was and I was always a strong promoter of a kind of strategic autonomy, but precisely because there has been misunderstanding with this expression and this concept. Strategic autonomy for Europe was never, from a French point of view, seen as decoupling Europe from the US. It was often interpreted that way with some bad faith by some partners, but it was never done with this purpose of decoupling. So I think we are there. We must advocate for a stronger European autonomy. But at the same time, I don't think that we should excessively unplug the transatlantic link, because, and don't get me wrong, what Vance has said in Munich was terrible. Many of Trump's initiatives are terrible, but I think we should keep a cool head and go above the rhetoric. Rhetoric is very aggressive, postures are very provocative, but what does matter is acts. And when we talk about defense and security, it's everything on the long run. So we should not be overreacting to declarations, and we should, once again, keep calm and identify also the points where there is stability, there are convergences, and there are still strengths in the transatlantic bond. Business community on both sides of the Atlantic are shaken by the tariffs policy of Trump, but have the same interest. And there is a vibrant transatlantic business community. Even in terms of security and defense, there are still areas when we cooperate very well. US have not pulled out of NATO yet. I don't think they will, but they have not pulled out of NATO. They have not withdrawn their troops in Poland. So, once again, as Radek was saying previously, we have to pay attention with what Trump is saying, because he means it, and it's serious. But at the same time, he can say one thing one day and another thing the day after. And so the main issue now with the US and for the transatlantic link is unpredictability. That's dangerous, that's concerning, but that's not, I would say, irreversible. So I think we can find some common tracks still. Last word maybe, you use already twice the expression liberal order, rule-based liberal order. I just would be cautious with the use of this expression. It's very Western-centered. The end of the liberal rule order for us is disturbing, but seen from other parts of the world, it's not seen as so disturbing, because if you go to some parts of Africa, if you go to some parts of Europe who have known the war before the Ukrainian war, think about the Balkans, for example, the liberal rules order was a kind of a myth created by the West to ensure its domination. I don't buy this narrative myself. I'm a Westerner, I'm a proud Westerner. But we have to put that into perspective. Once again, we live now in another era. We're entering another era, very chaotic indeed. So we have to find common ground with our allies, partners, and mainly with the US, but not only. But we have also to be creative. We cannot go back to business as usual and to the good old days. It's over, that's for sure.
Thanks. General Błazeusz, you're in the military. What is your sense? Radek Sikorski was saying it's crystal clear that the US wants to stay in NATO. Minister Valtonen called them our friends across the Atlantic. On the military side of that, are you seeing any changes? Has the relationship shifted at all, or are things more or less the same at your level as they would have been 3 months, 5 or 6 months ago?
Not really, but if you allow me first begin with a little product. It's called placement or allocation. Quick quote for everybody. It is time to stop pretending that Europeans and Americans share a common view of the world, or even that they occupy the same world. On the all-important question of power, the efficacy of power, the morality of power, the desirability of power, American and European perspectives are diverging. Anybody knows where this quote is from? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Robert Kagan in his book from 2003, Iraq period, of Paradise and Power, America and Europe in the New World Order. So I quoted it because I would like to say that really nothing new is happening. I mean, we had a bumpy road with our allies quite often, as in any marriage, but I would say that this time is just the way of unpacking is something that we're not used to. And on the military level, in my case, as the Eurocorps commander up in Strasbourg, I just recently had a huge conference of all the corps commanders in Europe that was run by the dual-headed American four-star. I must say we're still doing our business. Politics rhetoric is one thing, and this is always difficult discussion. This is, I call it a social media fight. Because right now somebody tweets something or posts something and then immediately somebody else needs to respond. And sometimes I think we are just, as mentioned by my previous speaker, we need to be cool-headed. We need to try to, I used to be a planner, a strategic planner before, so we should prepare different courses of action, even those unthinkable, something that didn't happen before, something we never heard before, something that was never done to us, and just think, okay, how we deal with it. We need to be prepared and don't immediately react, get nervous, start throwing punches, because we need each other. As mentioned before, also our economic ties are so deep, there is impossible to decouple between the US and Europe. And now a little bit on the military side of the house. When this 1 week stop happened in aid and intel, actually, it again, as mentioned by President Macron, it was another little electric shock that we needed. And for example, it's not the result, but some things were speeding up. We all know about the Starlink, but right now, Eutelsat is trying to catch up. It will take time, but they're going in the right direction. So we already have a smaller alternative, but it's happening. Then when the US is repositioning some of the forces, especially from the famous J-town, we call it Yeshonka, a different European Union country is stepping up its presence. So we are supporting each other, working together. Now with these electric shocks, as mentioned by the French president, I think we just need to become a better electricians to deal with those power outages or other electric things that have happened. And I'm pretty sure more of those electric shocks are coming. This is just the way the current US administration, it's their own approach. But when you analyze closely, a lot of the things that are done, they are just for a certain purpose. And we need to understand it. I sometimes say that maybe we should ask the CEOs of the big companies, how to deal in a more transactional manner. Now, the business was mentioned here. I think this is extremely important that I strongly believe we have a good business leverage on our transatlantic allies, because those businesses, due to globalization, are so interrelated. On both sides of the Atlantic, we have a huge demand for the defense articles. So we are already manufacturing a lot of subparts for them. They are having good businesses in Europe. We are purchasing a lot of US equipment. So I strongly believe there is a leverage. And to sum up, my predecessor was talking about the European autonomy. I rather like to say European harmony, because there are ways that the US can do for us, and there are ways that the European Union can do for all of us together. We are one family. And to really close up, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that more unites us than divides. Yes, on a political level, this is very heated discussion. Those electric shocks were coming, and I think, as I said, they will be coming. But on the military level, the cooperation is ongoing, as always. This was always the fact in diplomacy, that there were cool-off periods between certain nations or certain organizations, but the military cooperation was ongoing for a number of reasons, because we are supporting. And last really point, US strategy is the force projection. So they will always need Europe for the force projection, not only in Europe, but also in Africa and to a certain extent to the Middle East. So we need each other. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's interesting. I'm also Canadian, and I think that it's more than a shock of what has happened in the United States and the way that Trump is undermining Canadian sovereignty. I guess an electroshock or lightning bolt. It's completely changed the relationship in a very fundamental and historic way, and the level of trust is very low right now. I'd like to get. Unfortunately, this panel does not have an American on it, which would have been great to have. Are you born in the States, right? Okay, so you can give us a bit of an insight, but I'm sure you all have. Yeah. But I'm sure you all have regular dealings with Americans. I was struck when in Munich that it's quite difficult to get an insight into the administration's thinking, because when we were talking to people in Munich, the people who show up there from Washington, the Republicans, tend to be old school Republicans who think like the old school Republicans. And so you talk to Lindsey Graham or whatever, and they are anti-Russian, pro-Ukrainian. They say all the things that historically a Republican would say, but you get the sense that they have very little traction with the administration. So you're talking to these people who are very senior and influential, but they don't actually give you a good insight into where the US is tracking. So maybe if you could just tell us, from the context you have with the States, you're part of a Polish-American parliamentary group, what's your view of where this is going? What are they thinking?
So I've in fact also returned from the US just sort of 2 days ago. I've been in Houston, Texas, in fact, and I'll be going again in 3 days. Indeed, we're running a Polish-American parliamentary caucus. And we truly believe that parliamentary diplomacy is something that on the level of Europe, has a role to play, especially given the fact that there's a lot that the parliamentarians, actually a lot of sort of more leeway and flexibility that the MPs have, comparing to sort of to our ministers, especially if we come from the governing party. I think there is the sense which we're getting, is that a lot, as Monsieur Danjean mentioned, is posture. A lot of what we hear is theatrical, and as I've mentioned, even perhaps, and I don't want to mind read or attempted mind reading, but I think that the speech by J.D. Vance and a lot of what is being also written and and put forward by the American president is directed at the American domestic audience. Whereas, we as Europe, we continue sort of to refresh our Twitter and sort of refresh our X, and try to sort of, we cannot be readjusting our foreign policy based on the sort of the chaos that is being thrown, where a lot of the events that are being thrown are really not as relevant. We can see, of course, certain shifts on a macro scale, shifts when it comes to trying to erode multilateral institutions, trying to erode, and I'll come again, the liberal world order, because I think that there were attempts indeed to sort of, to especially erode, again, the territorial integrity of Ukraine, for instance, right? So according to Poland, all the territorial decisions of Ukraine are again up to President Zelensky to make. And we believe that, Crimea, Kherson, Donetsk, Lugansk, etc. are Ukraine. And as much as Ukraine is pragmatic, we believe, and my perhaps consider certain concessions in the future, it is only for them to decide, not for the Americans, not for the Polish, not for the other Europeans to decide. And so I think that there are certain shifts, but we have to remind ourselves that, thankfully, multilateralism and the defense of freedoms and the defense of liberty and the pursuit of happiness and pursuit of economic prosperity does not actually begin and end in Washington, D.C., you know? And here, this is my cause with the Europeans, is that as much as we can try to understand our American colleagues, I think it's very important that we stop navigating only by that as our Northern Star, but really try to look internally, you know, and soul search. And after, you know, we've during the Munich Security Conference, when we were discovering this seismic shift, you know, we were really feeling that the history is happening in the very rooms in front of our eyes, you know. I was asking myself, you know, how we as Europe have arrived at this point, you know, what were the mistakes that we have, as Europeans have done. And I truly think that, you know, we have failed to define, when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, or Russia-West conflict really, which it really is, I believe, what really victory, how the victory looks like for the EU, you know? And this allowed the Trump administration, 3 years into the conflict, you know, 1,100 days into the conflict, to essentially put forward the first peacemaking agenda, you know? That this is really preposterous, that we had allowed ourselves for this to be the first entry point for the peacemaking agenda. And our philosophy of supporting Ukraine for however long it takes was too wishy-washy, was imprecise, you know. Supporting Ukraine for however long it takes is not precise enough, you know. I know that this sounds maybe audacious, ambitious, and daring, but I truly believe that the goal for Europe, especially for Eastern Europe, you know, where we are faced with existential threat as Poland, and we do not have the unique nuclear capabilities that our colleagues, you know, that in the UK and France do, is really to try to defeat Russia on the territory of Ukraine and to push Russia and Russian imperialism away of our EU borders as much as possible, as quick as possible. And this means strengthening the negotiation position of Ukraine forcefully. Yeah,
great, thanks. As the sort of American on the panel, you've also just come back from Washington. Yeah. What is your take on what's actually happening on the other side of the Atlantic?
So I was in Washington, D.C. Just over 100 days ago for the inauguration. And there was this sense of energy there. I got subsumed in it as well, to say, after the last 4 years, it's Ukraine, we've not seen any advance, big problems taking place. The debt, the American debt, which a lot of this comes down to, is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the approach that has been used for decades and decades by America of being involved in the rest of the world simply isn't working. Look at all the places America has wandered into over the decades, whether it be going back to Vietnam, whether it includes Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan and Iraq are the biggies, clearly, and now Ukraine. What benefit? What was there? How did the United States benefit from going there, seeing American lives being lost, and simply the rest of the world being angry at it because it didn't work out well? And Donald Trump has been able to leverage this, to exploit this internal anger in America, that the rest of the world is actually to be blamed for America being much, much poorer today, or so it seems. Hence, tariffs. Now, tariffs, he says, is a beautiful world. But you quickly learn the hard way that when Trump puts tariffs on any other country, those tariffs are on the American people to pay more when those imports come to America. And the penny is slowly dropping. So where this goes economically, as America itself becomes slightly poorer, he's falling in the polls as well, is difficult to tell. The concern I have is that the scale of change that Donald Trump is introducing, not just on foreign policy, but domestically as well. The judicial system of how military four-star generals are selected for their next appointments, that they must sign up to Donald Trump's approach. So different from whatever has happened before. But more, it's the entire isolationist approach. As the world gets more and more dangerous, the number of red lights that are flashing on the global order dashboard continue to increase. And we've just had India and Pakistan is another one. Sudan is another one there. Where is the collective leadership to try and put some of these fires out? And that leaves Europe to try and pick up some of those pieces, with the priority, of course, of dealing with that existential threat that is posed by Russia.
Thanks. I do have more questions, but I'd also like to take some questions from the floor, just to make sure that everybody feels that they're participating. If you can keep the questions really tight so we don't go overboard. So over here first, please.
Yep.
And if you identify yourself
Yep. So, Robert Benson, the Center for American Progress, based in Washington. I appreciate the sober tone of the panel, and I appreciate the Bob Kagan quote from Paradise and Power. Although, if you permit me, I do want to quibble a little bit with the conclusion that we've seen this before. This seems to be qualitatively different. And if you permit me to talk a little bit about domestic American politics, the constitutional crisis that the United States finds itself in, the abandonment of the rule of law, suspension of due process, invocation of 19th century laws, are we not being potentially a little bit optimistic with what possibly could happen should democracy in the United States continue to erode? And then what are the implications for not only American foreign policy, but for the international liberal order as such? If you could speak to that, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, that's a great question, because there's the assumption, and you sort of see it, the further east you go in Europe, the closer to Russia, the stronger the desire not to think too hard about, is America fundamentally different? And is it tracking in a Turkish authoritarian direction, is no longer intrinsically a liberal democratic state, and is moving in a very different, perhaps authoritarian direction, is something that this close to Russia we just don't really want to contemplate. Maybe I could grab the tail end of the panel is that a fear that what we're seeing now is not a long-term American trend of trying to strengthen Europe or increase European defense spending, make Europe stand more and so on, but there's a fundamental shift to something that we've never seen before?
No, the point is right, indeed, and it's a matter of fear and concern, and this is probably the most serious one, I would say, because if we stick only to the, I would say, foreign policy part and the transatlantic part, I wouldn't say I would be optimistic, but at least I think there are good reasons to once again to keep a cool head. But when we consider internal domestic shifts that have been developing over the last few months, it's quite concerning. It is also echoing things that are happening in Europe. We have more and more political parties siding with Trump, the last one being in Romania. So trying to redefine another transatlantic partnership on ideological basis. And that is very concerning indeed. Because these people, and I have this in France with the extreme right, what has defined extreme right in France, ideologically and historically? Anti-Americanism. And now you have these people being transatlanticists, paradoxically, because they are Trumpist. This is something totally new. So the new chaotic world in which we live is not only on foreign policy paradigms, it's also on ideological basis on which we build the relationship. And that's very concerning. One word you mentioned very interestingly, because I attended both, the Vance speech and the Lindsey Graham speech in Munich. What struck me, one of your colleagues asked Lindsey Graham, he said, you used to come to Munich for decades now, and you were going on board with Lieberman and with McCain. Both of them have gone, and you are the sole remainder of this transatlanticist, traditional transatlanticist. Where do you side now and where do you stand now? I was struck by the fact that Graham sided totally with Vance and Trump. Totally, and saying something which was a bit offending, like, yeah, indeed, I had thought that usually I would come with McCain and Lieberman, but they are gone, and it's a new era, and we have to think differently. What does it show? And it shows something that I'm sure Tobias had the same experience as a parliamentarian when we exchanged with our colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic. You would talk to rational, I would say, old-school Republicans, traditional transatlanticists, and they would tell you privately, we don't agree with Trump, we don't agree with all this craziness, but electorally, they make us win. And if we don't win in our constituencies, the woke Democrats would win. So it's even worse. So we side with them because they win. So what I want to say is two things. The first thing is probably if something has to change, it will come from inside the Republican Party in the US. And second, it will be prompted by electoral fear. So if some of the Trump measures, be they domestic constitutional measures or tariffs policy and so on, backfire, then there is an opportunity maybe to see a change from within.
Błazeusz, do you see that danger that the U.S. is moving in an authoritarian direction, which means that there is no longer shared commonality of values between European democracies and the U.S.?
Do you want me still to serve? Highly political question. Well, a few quick comments. First of Canada, I heard a very good exchange of opinions, discussions between President Trump and the Canadian Prime Minister, and maybe that's the way it should be done. President Macron also did a great job when he had this meeting. I would say, first of all, I'm a poli-sci major too, a graduate of the US Air Force Academy as well, served as a commanding general in Afghanistan. So I think I know a little bit about our American allies. The US citizens have decided, and we're going to have this president for the next 3+ years, and we just have to come up with the ways of how to deal with the current leadership. On the other hand, as mentioned here in Europe, more and more so-called, and I stress so-called because there are different definitions of the far right, are gaining ground too. So we have our own internal challenges to deal with. Now, I think what the US is doing, and a lot of my friends from the US are telling me that we want to motivate Europe to take more responsibility. We've been doing it for many years. It was President Reagan, it was President Kennedy who were, it was, remember James Baker who said that the US does not have a dog in this fight in Bosnia, right? And eventually they joined. So very difficult, but I think they are trying, and rightly so, to force us to invest more in our defense capabilities. We have not been doing it for many years for a number of reasons, and I think now it's the time, and it's slowly happening. It will take time, but it's the right direction. Now, a little bit quick comment on the value-based approach. We have to make our own analysis. Were we successful in Afghanistan? Were we successful in Africa, as mentioned? So it has to be a tailored, I would say, value-based approach, because these countries often don't understand our values. And if we put this up front that you have to be more like us, we will support you, we will not be able to do any politics. For example, in Africa, where currently there are no democratic countries, more or less, if I may say so. I'm sorry, with few exceptions. Do not quote me on this one, please. Now, the last point, really. There are a number of US platforms that we do not have, and the question is it worth building such platforms? The best example is F-35. The other one is heavy transport helicopter. On the more of an integrating system, and I'm not promoting these products, but right now US is using for a number of years, supporting Ukraine, but also NATO recently decided to buy this MAVEN system, MSS, that integrates with artificial intelligence, all possible information from a number of databases, and then it's very open architecture. So those systems are there, and we are all using it. So I would say there's a lot at stake, and what more important, we all need to remain, the famous word, interoperable. So whatever decision is, we go left, right, or we need to be able to talk to each other. And the most important is, obviously, my American friends were also telling me, Peter, you Europeans are screaming you want to be at the negotiating table with Russia. Who's going to represent Europe? Which particular official? And do you have a common standpoint that will be presented by Europe during these negotiations? And I leave the answer to this question to you, but I mean, it's a difficult question. That's why the most important for Europe is cohesion, okay? If we're able, just like in NATO, if we're able to have the cohesion, speak more or less with one voice, which is difficult due to the number of the member states and the allies on the NATO side, but that's the only way. If we're cohesive and we are able to finally make this decision and go forward and stick to this decision, it will be very, very successful. Thank you.
Thanks for touching on that. I think that's a crucial issue is, does Europe have the military capacity, the technology? Many of these systems are dependent on the US. Europe hasn't invested, hasn't developed its own. Is it worth doing them? I know there was a serious discussion in Canada. Does Canada continue buying F-35s? That seems to have died down after the election. But that is a live issue. How much can you continue relying on American weapon systems? Does it make sense to invest as well? I think there was a question over here. Yes, if we can just get the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Tomasz Moran from Kazimierz Puławski Foundation. My question is basically on Ukraine. Actually, as Puławski Foundation, we organized a couple of weeks ago the parliamentary visit to Washington, D.C. And what we heard from even like very conservative MAGA-style congressmen, senators, I can basically confirm what you said, that Americans are 100% committed to NATO. But they also emphasize that Ukraine is not NATO member states and Ukraine's security is not core national security interest of Americans. So my question is, should we accept this position of American administration and wider political circles, or we should convince Americans somehow that Ukraine is kind of national security interest from Americans, and what arguments can we use to convince our American friends? Thank you.
Great. Does anybody want to hop in and take that? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'd love to. Right, so excellent question, Tomasz. So, well, I do believe that supporting Ukraine currently is not charity, it's self-defense. And basically what Ukraine has done, what Kiev has done, is bought us time. The fact that Kiev has managed to push back the Russian offensive in the first days of the full-scale Russian invasion is a brutal act to Eastern Europe, you know, that currently east of Przemysl, of our cities in the eastern of Poland, we do not have currently Russian Federation, but we still have fighting Ukraine. And as I've mentioned, it is in our very much existential interest to push back the Russian offensive as much as possible, as to defeat Russia on the territory of Ukraine. And Ukrainians, you know, are fighting very often with our weaponry, but with their own blood. And this is an enormous sacrifice that they have made. And I believe that, you know, while speaking to our American colleagues, so we can bring up the fact that, you know, if, you know, we truly want to speak about preservation of the transatlanticism based on values as well, because transactionality is a dangerous trend, and we have to preserve the values, and we have to work ceaselessly and tirelessly, everybody here in this room, day in, day out, to preserve the liberal world order, as I truly believe, is the fact that Ukrainians currently, 1,169 days from the Russian full-scale invasion today, are daily fighting and literally dying for daring to associate themselves with the values of NATO, for daring to associate themselves with the values of the EU. And if, you know, this romantic, heroic fight of David and Goliath, but Goliath which needs a sling, you know, which needs ammunition, you know, is not to revive our belief in NATO values, then, you know, I don't know what else will. So I truly believe that currently what's happening between Ukraine and Russia is the least morally ambiguous conflict in 80 years of European history recently, and this is a moral test for all of us here. And I truly believe that Poland is ready to take on this challenge, and we very much hope that with the support of our European allies and our sort of brilliant colleagues as well from the British and the French parliaments and our military leadership, we are able to do so. Thank you.
We can all be very proud of what NATO is. It's the most formidable, most potent military alliance the world has ever seen. But let me be provocative here deliberately. When it's come to Ukraine, NATO formally has failed. This has been a fire on the doorstep of Europe, and we've not put it out. And no wonder Trump is angry and disappointed that it goes on for 3 years. NATO hid behind the excuse that because Ukraine was not a member of NATO, then it wasn't NATO's interest to get involved. Well, I was involved in uniform in Bosnia, in Iraq and Afghanistan. None of those are NATO countries. We were spooked by Putin's rhetoric. So this formidable alliance, I'm afraid, did not come to the aid of European security simply because Ukraine was not a member. And that's a failure of deterrence, and it's where we are today. This war with Ukraine has been summarized by hesitance from the very start. Should we send offensive weapons or defensive weapons? Should we send tanks, main battle tanks? Should we send F-16s? A public debate each time we have a discussion about it, and eventually, after some time, we give the weapon systems over, giving Putin time to react. This fire should have been put out within the first 3 months, and it's come to this point now where Russia is emboldened, it's got China watching its back as well, and America is frustrated, and that's why Trump is wanting to push back, leaving us, Europe, to pick up the pieces. We've got to be able to look our enemy in the eye, rekindle some Cold War statecraft skills, just as we did during the Cuban Missile Crisis, look our enemy in the eye and say we're going to stand up for what we believe in.
I'd argue that the core issue there is Russian nuclear weapons. Without that, this would have been a very different war.
Escalating your ladder is absolutely important, but you don't then just say, no, we're going to have nothing to do with it, which is what we did.
General, you wanted to?
Well, to answer your question, one, just wait for Mr. Putin. He will do the job for us, and I think the other side will realize what kind of a player he is and what he really wants. Second one, I call it a modern CNN effect. I think we need to make sure that we win this, not cognitive war, but let's say cognitive struggle in the US, that the message about what Russia is doing in the Ukrainian war is still there, okay? That it doesn't disappear, that the US society sees the atrocities that are committing there. And usually, eventually, it works quite well. And about what was mentioned by my previous speaker, we have to remember to give the credit to our European Union. European Union stepped forward to train Ukrainians first, not NATO. The the European Union Military Assistance Mission Ukraine was created about 2.5 years ago, before NATO decided to create this JTEC in Bydgoszcz, Poland. So European Union took the step first, but then we still needed SAGU, now NSATU in Wiesbaden, to kind of a little bit coordinate it and work together. And the last point, we crossed a lot of self-established European red lines. Some US red lines are here during the war in Ukraine. And I think we're going to pass more of those because we believed that, you know, whatever we do will be escalatory if we give them tanks, if we give them F-16s, if we give them Patriots, and so on and so on. Look what happened. Okay, and the moment Germany mentioned that they may eventually give those towers, you've seen the response of President Putin, right? So we should not be afraid to cross those political red lines and support the Ukraine as much as we can. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I don't want to cross Kasia because she's a dangerous woman to cross. So we're in the red already on time. So thank you very much to the panel and to the questions. I would have loved to ask some more, but thank you again for taking part.
Well,